In my house, on a quiet street in Wicha, there are always two things: memories and cats. And, most often, there are more of the latter. This morning, Blackwood, my pedigree British cat, had decided that the windowsill in my bedroom was the perfect spot to demonstrate his royal dissatisfaction with his breakfast. He sat there, tail wrapped majestically around his paws, giving me that look, the one that meant, "Cordelia, you know the food has to be fresh." "I understand you perfectly, old man," I said, scratching him behind the ear. "But you know, when you're 65, you start to understand the difference between fresh and just good. Sometimes, you have to accept that." He blinked at me, a dignified gesture as if condescending to my philosophical musings, then jumped off the windowsill. A minute later, he was licking his paw in the living room, where 8 of his fellow felines sprawled out on sofas, armchairs, and special cat couches. My little furry empire had started with just one pregnant cat named Duchess, a gift from Saul on our 15th wedding anniversary. The cattery hadn't become my life all at once. At first, it was just a hobby, something to keep my hands and mind busy after stressful shifts at my old job at the tax office. Saul used to joke that with my tenacity and principled nature, I should have been a prosecutor instead of an auditor. But it was these very qualities that helped me turn my hobby into a respected business. My British cats have earned a reputation as some of the finest in 3 states, and I keep their pedigrees with the same meticulous care I used to apply when checking tax returns. Saul and I had built our house in the 1970s, a spacious 2-story home with a large backyard and a magnificent porch. When we first bought it, it seemed enormous for a young couple, but over the years, every corner had filled with life. Our daughter, Taffia, grew up in the back room, and the garage became Saul's workshop, where he crafted carpentry masterpieces. After Saul's death 5 years ago, the garage became the cat kindergarten. I walked into the kitchen, where I had 2 large bowls of water and 3 bowls of food set out. Despite the common stereotypes about cat ladies, I always kept my house spotless. A cattery is not just about love for animals, it's also about business. My clients need to see that their future pets are growing up in impeccable conditions. I sighed as I looked at the clock. It was already 9 o'clock on Sunday morning, and I was finishing my morning cleaning. We women over 60 are strange creatures. We sleep less and less, yet somehow manage to do more and more. Taffia and her fiancé were due to arrive in an hour. The news still evoked mixed feelings in me: joy for my daughter, and slight bewilderment. Taffia had always seemed too independent for marriage. In school, she was one of those girls who planned to become president, not settle down. In college, she threw herself into economics with such zeal that Saul and I joked she would either become rich or start a revolution. In the end, she chose a career in marketing, and judging by her stories, she was quite successful. Her visits home had become less frequent, and her phone calls shorter, but I tried not to dwell on it. After all, I had taught her to be independent. Then, a month ago, I received a phone call in the middle of the night, and an excited voice said, "Mom, I'm getting married. His name is Castor, and I want you to meet him." Since then, I had seen my future son-in-law twice at a hurried lunch and then at a family dinner I threw in their honor. Castor Lane was impressive, tall, with that special confidence in his movements that comes from being a man used to getting what he wants. He worked in real estate and talked a lot about promising neighborhoods, investments, and market value. Taffia looked at him with a kind of admiration that made me a little wary. My determined, critically minded daughter had suddenly turned into a nodding doll. The doorbell rang 15 minutes before the appointed time. I adjusted my pants, smoothed my blouse, and went to open the door, mechanically pushing aside a curious kitten with my foot. Mom Taffia hugged me with uncharacteristic emotion. Behind her stood Casta, looking particularly elegant in a light gray suit. "Mrs. Atlee," he said, extending his hand for a handshake. But then, as if changing his mind, he leaned down and kissed me on the cheek. "You look wonderful, and your house is simply magnificent." His gaze swept over the hallway and through the open living room door, as if assessing every detail. There was something in the way he looked at everything that made me tense up inside, but I pushed the feeling away. "Come in," I said, smiling. "I've made tea and cake." "Taffia, you remember where the dishes are, don't you?" I said, motioning for my daughter to help me set the table while Castor looked around the living room. I took out my signature blueberry pie, my mother's recipe. Taffia used to devour half of it in one sitting when she was a child. I wondered if she remembered. "So, this is where your famous cats live," Castor said, standing at the glass door leading into the cat nursery. Impressive. How many do you have now? 12 adults and 6 kittens, I replied, a little proud despite myself. 2 litters, one still very small, and of course, all purebred with papers. I couldn't hide a hint of pride. I have one of the oldest British Cattaries in Kansas. Every cat has a complete pedigree in medical records. And how much does one of these specimens cost? Castor turned to me with a smile that seemed a little too practiced. It depends on the class, I said vaguely, shrugging. It felt inappropriate to discuss the financial side of things at that moment. But Castor seemed eager for the answer, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. I hoped I was wrong, but something in his demeanor didn't sit quite right with me. With someone who wasn't even interested in buying my mom won national shows, Topia interjected, 17th plates on the table. Her cats can be worth several thousand. Several thousand for a cat, Castor whistled. That's amazing. We sat down at the table and the conversation turned to the upcoming wedding. It was planned for 2 months later, at the end of September, at a country club on the outskirts. Off we go. We want something elegant, but not too lavish, Topia said, and I noticed hope. We now appeared in her speech about 80 guests. A classic ceremony. Sounds wonderful, I smiled, cutting her a piece of pie. And the honeymoon? Oh, we're planning a trip to Europe. Castor covered Taffia's hand with his Italy, France, maybe Switzerland. I've always wanted to show her the Alps. Impressive plans. I sipped me tea, trying to suppress a slight feeling of unease. And where are you planning to live after the wedding? Topia and Castor exchanged glances, and it seemed to me that they had instantly had a whole silent conversation between them. Actually, Mom, Taffia began in the same tone she used at school when she asked for more pocket money. We were just abuto. Talk to you about that. Something in her tone made me wary. We were thinking, she continued, that it would be ideal if we could live here. I almost choked on my tea. Here in my house, in the family home, Castor corrected gently. Taffia grew up here, and it's a wonderful place to raise a family. Besides, it's already set up 4th cat business, which, by the way, could be expanded considerably, added Tafia. With my marketing experience and Castor's connections, we could take the catery to a whole new level. I slowly put down my cup, trying to process what I had heard. And where am I supposed to fit into this scheme? Mom, Topia looked at me, if explaining the obvious. You're 65. This house is too big for one person. You could find something smaller, more comfortable, maybe an apartment in the center, closer to shops and hospitals. I raised my eyebrows. I'm not planning on dying anytime soon, if that's what you're implying. No one is talking about death, Castor interjected in his soothing tone. But you have to think about the future. Maintaining such a large house requires effort and money. Besides, he paused, real estate is at its peak right now. This house is worth at least $500,000, so that's what the question about the cat's value was about. He was assessing all the assets. I felt a deliritation rising inside me. My house is not for sale, I said calmly, but firmly, and I have no plans to move. Mom, Topia leaned forward. We're not talking abusing it, we're talking about you giving it to us as a wedding gift. I stared at my daughter in shock. She was serious, completely serious. Your father. I saved up for this house for 10 years. I said slowly. We paid the mortgage for 25 years. Every corner of this place holds memories for us. This is my business, my life, and you want me to just give it to you as a gift? Technically, it would be a gift, Castor interjected. The tax benefits are more favorable that way. I looked at him, and something in my expression made him fall silent. Besides, Taffia added not as confidently, it's a family tradition. Grandma gave her house to you and Dad when you got married. What? I was completely confused. What are you talking about? My parents never gave us the house. We bought it ourselves, penny by penny. Topia blinked. But you said. I never said that. I shook my head. A heavy silence hung in the room, broken only by Blackwood's purring. Sensing the tension, he jumped onto my lap, as if to show his support. In any case, Castor cleared his throat. We think it would be a sensible decision. We'll be free from the burden of maintaining a large house, and we would be able to continue the family business. I have no intention of freeing myself from my home or my business, I replied, feeling my voice grow colder. This is not up for discussion. Mom, you'll have to think about the future, Topia began in a tone I remembered from her teenage years, a mixture of condescension and irritation. You can't live alone with cats forever. What will happen in 5 years? 10. Who will take care of you? I've taken good care of myself for the last 5 years, he said, stroking Blackwood and drawing confidence from his steady purr, and I plan to continue doing so. Cordelia, Castor said, addressing me by name. 4th first time. I understand how you feel, but think about the practical side of things. You'll have grandchildren. Don't you want them to grow up in this beautiful house just like Sophia did children? I looked at my daughter. She had never mentioned wanting children. On the contrary, she had always emphasized that her career was more important to her. We're planning a big family. Topia smiled. But it didn't reach her eyes. At least 3 children. I felt conversation was going somewhere it shouldn't, as if they were trying to corner me with emotional blackmail. I'll be happy to see my grandchildren in my house as often as you want to visit, I said, emphasizing Thurid. Visit now. Shall we get back to discussing the wedding? I'd like to know how I can help with the arrangements. Tafa looked disappointed, Castor slightly annoyed, but the conversation shifted to more neutral topics. However, the atmosphere remained tense until the end of their visit. When they left, I sat down in my favorite chair, surrounded by cats who, sensing my state, gathered around me like a fluffy support group. What was that, guys? I asked them. Does my own daughter really think she can just come in and demand my house? Blackwood jumped onto the armrest and stared at me with his amber eyes as if to say, "Are you surprised?" I sighed, lost in thought. Something told me that this conversation was only the beginning, and judging by the way Castor looked at my house, by how easily he talked about its value, this tree was just getting started. An unwelcome thought through my mind. What if they ask about the will? I pushed the thought away and went to check on the kittens. After all, life goes on, and MIF-free charges needed me regardless of the strange ideas that had suddenly popped into my daughter's head. A week passed after Sophia and Castor's visit, during which I deliberately avoided talking to my daughter. I needed time to digest their unexpected proposal, which, to call a spade was more like Edmund every time. The phone rang. I felt a momentary tension, but I forced myself to answer. After all, I was an adult, not a teenager hiding from problems. In the end, it was Sophia who suggested a family dinner to discuss everything calmly. I agreed, deciding that there was no point in postponing the inevitable all day before they arrived. I was on edge. Even Peach, the calmest of my cats, meowed questioningly as I wiped down the already clean kitchen table for the 4th time. Yes, I'm nervous, I admitted to the cat, who was looking at TMH with obvious concern, but that's normal. Conversations about money and property rarely go smoothly, even between closed people. I planned a simple but elegant menu: rosemary roasted chicken pesto gratin, and a mozzarella salad. I set the table in the dining room, which I only used on special occasions. Familakina silver cutlery, my grandmother's crystal glasses. I wanted to remind Sophia that this house was not just home to an old woman with cats, but to a woman with a history, taste, and dignity. The Aravet at 7 o'clock sharp. Topia was wearing a strict, dark blue dress that emphasized her bossiness, like nature. Castor, impeccable as always, brought expensive wine and a bouquet of Lilius, me favorite flowers. At any other time I would have appreciated the gesture, but today it seemed a little calculating. "Mum, you've outdone yourself," Sophia said, looking at the table with obvious approval. "It's just like old times." "A treat," I smiled, taking the bouquet from Castor. "Come in, sit down, everything's ready." The first half hour of dinner was spent in awkward attempts to keep the conversation. Nutritopia talked about the latest project at work. Castor discussed the Wichita real estate market, and I shared news about Thecatons that had recently been born. We all knew that this was just a prelude to the main conversation, but no one dared to start it. Finally, when I brought out dessert, the blueberry pie that Sophia loved so much as a child, Castor cleared his throat and set his wineglass on the table. "Cordelia," he began with that special tone people use when they're about to get down to brass tacks, "we'd like to get back to our conversation a booth house. I understand that this is not an easy topic, but let's look at this situation rationally." I nodded, letting him continue. "It was better to hear everything at once. You live alone in a 4-bedroom house with a large plot of land. Maintaining such a property requires considerable effort and expense. With age, this burden will only grow. At the same time, Taffy and I need space to start a family. What's more, the nursery you've built has enormous potential for expansion, but it requires new energy and ideas." "I love my house," I replied calmly, "and my nursery. They're not a burden to me. They're my life, my pleasure." "Mom," Teffy interjected, "Castor has researched the real estate market in the city center. There are some wonderful apartments in new complexes with elevators, 24-hour security, and shops. On the ground floor you could live much more comfortably." "And what would happen to my cats?" I raised an eyebrow. 12 adult purebred animals won't fit in an apartment, let alone kittens. Sophia and Castor exchanged glances. "Well, take care of the kit," Castor said. "I'm even willing to hire a professional breeder for the first few months until we get settled. Your business will continue." Just under our guidance, I felt a wave of indignation rising inside me. They were talking about me life, about creatures I had cared for 4 years, as if they were some kind of opposites that could be transferred by document. My cats can't just be handed over. My voice remained calm, but there was a steely edge to it. They're living creatures that know me, and trust me, I'm going to part with them. Mom, you're being irrational. Topia shook her head. Cats will get used to their new surroundings. It will be much easier and less stressful for you. Who will it be easier for, Tafia? I put down my fork. Me or you? Everyone, Castor interjected. Think about the future. In a few years, maintaining this house may become too much for you. We are offering a protodot. Will provide you with comfortable housing for the rest of your life, and the house will remain in the family for rest of your life. The phrase sounded unpleasant to my ears. They were already planning my old age and death, dividing up my property and all this, under the guise of concern. I appreciate your concern, I said, trying to remain diplomatic, but I repeat, I have no plans to part with my house or my cats. This is my final decision. Topia exhaled angrily. Mom, you've always been stubborn, but now you're taking it too far. We're offering you the perfect solution, and you won't even consider it. This is my home, Topia. I didn't have to consider offers to give it away. You're not thinking about us. My daughter's voice took on the whiny tone remembered from her teenage years. We want to start a family. We need a home. I've Dad were alive, he would understand. He always put the family first. The mention of Saul made me flinch inwardly. Topia knew it was a sore spot. Don't drag your father into this, I said, my voice softening. He would never have approved of what you're doing. How would you now? Topia raised her voice. You have no idea what he would have said. I lived with your father for 40 years. I looked my daughter straight in the eye. I think I have some idea of his views. Let's all come down. Castor put his hand on Tafia's shoulder. We didn't come here to argue but to find a solution. Cordelia, perhaps you need some time to think about our offer. We're not rushing you. I don't need time. I shook my head. My answer won't change. All right, Castor nodded with that condescending smile that people have when they're sure they'll get their way in the end. Let's just enjoy dinner. Noah can come back to this later. The rest of the evening passed in a tense atmosphere. We talked about the weather, politics, the latest movies, everything except the elephant in the room. When they finally got ready to leave, Topia hugged me goodbye, but it was a cold, formal embrace. Think about what I say, she said quietly. It would be better for all of us. After they left, I sat in the living room for a long time, looking at the family photos on the walls, Saul and me on our wedding day, little Tafia on the swing he made for her with his own hands, our first cat, the progenitor of my cattery, all Thossamarys, all those years, and now my own daughter was asking me to give it all up. The next 2 weeks turned into a real siege. Topia called every day, sometimes several times a day. At first she tried to be rational, coming up with new arguments in favor of moving, savings on home maintenance, proximity to medical facilities, social opportunities in the new residential complex. When that didn't work, she resorted to emotional manipulation. You never really thought about what I wanted, she said during one of our conversations. It's always been your cats and your kennel that mattered most, Tafia. I sent you to the best college in the state, I reminded her. Your father and I sacrificed everything to give you an education, and now you're telling me I didn't consider your wishes. That's different. It was your duty as a parent. And now, when it costs you nothing to help us start a family, you refuse giving you a house worth $500. Zero isn't nothing. I couldn't believe my ears. You don't want it anyway, Tafia exclaimed. You're living in the past, clinging to memories, instead of thinking about the future. After conversations like that, I felt devastated. Was I really that selfish? Maybe I was misunderstanding the situation. At some point, Castor joined the phone assault. His approach was more subtle, more professional. Cordelia, I understand how you feel, he said in his deep, reassuring voice, but let's look at this from the perspective of inheritance. Sooner or later, the house will go to Tafia. Wouldn't it be better to do it now, when you can see your home being given a new life? Besides, with the right gift agreement, we'll all save on taxes. I didn't plan on dying anytime soon, Castor, I replied, and as long as I'm alive, I'll live where I see fit. But the pressure didn't stop. Topia began to recruit allies. My old friends, whom she had managed to tell her side of the story, started calling me Cordelia. They said, you have to think about the future. Children are always more important than material things. Even my sister, who lives in Texas, called to express her concern an evening after a particularly difficult conversation with Topia. I sat on the porch watching the sunset and petting Duchess, the oldest cat at the shelter, who was dozing on my lap. I felt cornered. Maybe they were right. Maybe holding on to the house at my age really was unreasonable. My cell phone interrupted my thoughts. It was Martha, my client, and part-time real estate agent. She was calling to ask about the kittens from the latest litter. I promised my daughter a kitten for her birthday, she said. Do you have anything suitable? We discussed kittens, their personalities, and their colors, and, as the conversation drew to a close, I suddenly asked Martha, you work in real estate. Do you know Castor Lancaster? I heard surprise in her voice. Of course I do. He works 8 premium homes, or rather he used to. Rumor has it he's in trouble. I wasalamed. It's an unpleasant story apparently. He convinced several clients to invest in a building plot that turned out to be unsuitable, something to do with groundwater and building permits. I heard he's facing a lawsuit. Really, my heart began to race. More than mere reputation is everything in our business. If this story is confirmed, it will be difficult for him to find a new job in Wichita. After talking to Martha, I couldn't calm down. What if financial problems were the reason for Castor's sudden interest in my house? What if all this time it wasn't about building a family nest, but about quickly solving his financial problems? Days later, fate gave me the opportunity to find out more. Topia and Castor invited me to lunch at Eris, another attempt to reach a compromise, as they called it. I arrived a little early, and after taking a table saw them enter the restaurant without noticing me. I was about to wave to them when I noticed that they were arguing heatedly about something. They stopped a few meters from the entrance, and although I couldn't hear what they were saying, their body language indicated a serious disagreement. At one point, Castor, apparently losing patience, grabbed Sophia by the elbow and whispered something in her ear. I saw my daughter's face change, first shock, then anger, then determination. She nodded briefly, freed her arm, and headed for the restroom while Castor began to look around the room for me. When he saw me, he instantly transferred a smile, relaxed gait, the embodiment of a carefree son-in-law, on his way to lunch with his future mother-in-law Cordelia. He smiled broadly as he approached the table. You're already here, Topia. We'll be here in a minute. She's powdering her nose, of course. He smiled back, deciding not to mention what I had seen. How are you, Castor? Everything okay at work? A tiny shadow crossed his face, but he instantly regained his smile. Everything's great. The real estate market is booming, so there's plenty of work. Tafia joined us a few minutes later on. Lunch began with the usual small talk. I waited for them to bring up the subject of the house again, but to my surprise, they were unusually pleasant and didn't mention real estate at all. Instead, Castor told amusing stories from his practice, and Tafia talked about her plans for her honeymoon. It was only when dessert was served that Castor casually asked, by the way, Cordelia, how is your catering doing? I hear that prices for purebred cats are very high right now. Yes, demand is steady, I replied cautiously, especially for rare colors. Wonderful. He leaned back in his chair. You know, I've been thinking about our conversation about the house. Perhaps we were putting too much pressure on you, for which I sincerely apologize. It was all out of enthusiasm. He laughed, but I wanted to suggest a different approach. How about buy your house at market value? Of course, that would allow you to buy a comfortable apartment and still have a decent amount left over for, let's call it, a nest egg. I looked closely at my daughter. She sat with a tense smile, clearly waiting for my reaction. What about the kennel? I asked. Oh, you could keep a few of your favorite cats, Castor said casually, and the breeding animals could be sold along with the business. I've already spoken to a couple of potential buyers. Who? You've spoken to potential buyers for my business? I interrupted, not believing my ears. I acknowledged. Castor faltered, realizing he had said too much. No, I was just testing the waters. Purely theoretically, I wanted to see if there was any demand for such a business, and is there? I stared at him intently. Absolutely. He regained his confidence. One of my clients, the owner of a chain of pet stores, is very interested. He's willing to pay a good price for a well-established business with a good reputation. Taking into account the sale of the house and the kennel, you could get about $700, zero more than enough for a comfortable retirement. Now, everything fell into place. It wasn't about the family home. It wasn't about continuing traditions. It wasn't about caring for my future. Castor planned to sell the house in the kennel quickly to solve his financial problem. Sure, would you and Topia live? I asked, pretending to consider the offer if the house is sold. Oh, we're thinking of moving to Denver, Castor replied casually. There are excellent prospects for my business there. I looked at Tafia. Her face was tense. And you agreed to move to Denver? I asked my daughter. Leave my job here, my friends. Sometimes you have to make sacrifices for your family, she replied, quietly, not looking me in the eye. At that moment, I realized that my daughter wasn't just under the influence of her fiancé. She was in trouble. Whatever bound her to Castor was clearly something More than love, debt, fear. I didn't know for sure, but I felt that I had to protect not only my home but also my daughter from this man. On the way home, I thought about everything I had. Lord Castor was desperate. He needed money, and he saw my home and business as a quick solution to his problems. Topia, for some reason, supports his plan, although she clearly has her doubts. What should I do? Direct confrontation wouldn't push my daughter away. Still, I couldn't just sit and wait for them to find a way to get my house. As I enter the house, I immediately felt the tension of the last few weeks melt away. The soft purring of the cats, the familiar creaking of the floorboards, the smell of lavender that I grew in the backyard. Olaf. This was my refuge, my fortress, and I wasn't going to give it up without a fight. I sat down in the study that Useto belonged to Sol and opened an old secretary desk. Among the papers and documents I found what I was looking for. Will my husband and I had drawn up 10 years ago. According to it, after my death, the house would go to Tafia. It was natural and right, but now, knowing of Castor's plans to sell the house immediately, I realized that I had to protect the legacy that Sol and I had built together over a lifetime. I picked up the phone and dialed the number of Henry Fleming, our family lawyer who had been a friend of Solem since school. Henry, this is Cordelia Atley, I said when he answered. I need your help. It's about my will and more. 2 weeks before the wedding, a new tradition had begun in my life. Every morning started with a message from Tafia. Usually, it was a link to an article about the benefits of compact housing for seniors or photos of cozy apartments in the city center. Sometimes, Castor would join in on the digital assault, sending accidentally found ads for cat shelters or about successful family business transfers. I tried to respond neutrally, but it became more difficult with each passing day. After my meeting with the lawyer, I felt more confident. Henry helped me revise the will, adding a clause stating that the house could only be sold 5 years after it was inherited and only if the new owner had lived there personally during that time. We also filed paperwork to copyright Atley Blue Kennels, including the name and breeding system. These were small legal tricks, but they gave me a sense of security. However, today I had something more difficult to deal with than paperwork. Today, I was supposed to meet Castor's parents at an official family meeting before the wedding. The event was planned at one of the most expensive restaurants in Wicca, a choice that spoke volumes. Well, how do I look? I asked. Blackwood Woe was watching me get ready with regal indifference. For the meeting I chose a simple dark blue dress with a pearl brooch that Sol had given me on our 30th wedding anniversary. My gray hair was neatly styled and my makeup was subtle but elegant. I wanted to look dignified but not provocative. Blackwood blinked, which I interpreted as approval. Thank you, my friend, I said, patting him in the head. I hope tonight will be civilized. Listro was located in a historic building in the city center. Castor met me at the entrance looking even more elegant than usual, in a dark suit with a fashionable narrow tie. Cordelia, you look beautiful. He kissed me on the cheek with practiced gallantry. My parents are waiting for us. They are very much looking forward to meeting Tafia's mother likewise, I replied with a smile that I hoped didn't look too forced. The restaurant was exactly as I had expected. Cream-colored walls, subdued lighting, snow, white tablecloths, and waiters moving silent like shadows at a table in the back. I saw Tafia sitting next to an elderly couple. My daughter looked unusual. Mom. She stood up when she saw us, and her smile seemed a little more sincere than it had in recent weeks. Meet Vivian and Richard Lane. Castor's parents. Vivian Lane was a thin woman with immaculately dyed platinum blonde hair and so much jewelry that it seemed to jingle with every movement. Richard, a large man with graying temples and a tanned face, looked like someone who spent more time on the golf course than in an office. Finally, Vivian sighed, extending her ring-covered hand to me. We've heard so much about you, Mrs. Atla. Cordelia, please, I said, shaking her hand and noting that her grip was barely there. It's nice to meet you. Please sit down, Richard said, pointing to a free chair with the air of someone accustomed to giving orders. We've already ordered an aperitif. I hope you like champagne on special occasions, I replied, taking my seat, and today is definitely a special occasion. The waiter appeared immediately. My glass. The usual small talk began about the weather, the restaurant. Though beautiful Tafia looked in her new outfit, the tension eased a little, and I even began to hope that the evening would go smoothly. But after the first glass of champagne, Vivian got down to abusiness. Tafia told me you have your own cat business. She said it as if she were talking about something not entirely respectable. I have a British short-hair cat, I replied calmly, one of the oldest in the region. How unusual. Vivian exchanged a quick glance with her husband. And how long have you been doing this? Over 20 years after I retired, it became my main occupation. What did you do before you retired? Richard asked, showing interest in the conversation for the first time. I worked for the tax office, I said, noticing how Castor's shoulders tensed slightly at the mention of taxes. 35 years of service. Oh, civil service, Vivian said as if we're talking about a cleaning job. Very stable, exactly. I smiled. And what do you do? Richard owns a chain of car dealerships in 3 states. Vivian announced proudly. Lane Motors is the largest dealer of European cars in the Midwest. Impressive, I nodded. And you, Vivian? Oh, I devote myself to my family and charity work. She shrugged with feigned modesty. Women's clubs, hospital boards, organizing charity balls. You know, the usual. My mother is on the board of trustees for the Witcher Heart Museum. Castor interjected. That's a big responsibility, I said, trying to sound sincere. Appetizers were served, and the conversation shifted to discussing the menu. I chose a simple goat cheese salad, while the others ordered something more elaborate. And your house, is it big? Vivian asked casually when the appetizers were finished. It's spacious enough for me and my cats, I replied evasively. 4 bedrooms, a living room, a dining room, my study, and a special room for the kittens, and all those rooms are filled with cats. Vivian couldn't hide a slight grimace. No, of course not, I laughed. The cats have their own designated places. The house is kept spotlessly clean. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to breed them, of course. Of course, Vivian nodded doubtfully. It's just that I'm a little allergic to cat hair, I hope. There won't be any cats at the wedding, don't worry, Topia interjected. The wedding will be at a country club. There won't be any cats there. Thank goodness, Vivian muttered. Speaking of the house, Richard suddenly joined the conversation, putting down his knife and fork. Castor mentioned that you live in one of the older neighborhoods in Witcher. That must be valuable real estate, now that the market is on the rise. I suppose so, I said, taking a sip of water, although I don't follow the real estate market. Topia mentioned that you were thinking about moving. Rich, with that particular tone of a businessman getting to the heart of a deal, to something more compact. I glanced quickly at my daughter. She was staring at her plate, avoiding my gaze. I'm very attached to my house, I said bluntly. Andy, have no plans to move, but Sophia said. Vivian began. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. I smiled, trying to remain calm. We've discussed various options, but I haven't made any decisions about moving. An awkward silence hung over the table. Castor cleared his throat and tried to change the subject. Maybe we should discuss our honeymoon plans. Topia and I are thinking about Tuscany. Wait a minute, Richard interrupted. I thought Topiande had already been decided. You and Taffy are moving into her family home, and Cordelia is buying an apartment closer to the center. That would be the perfect solution. Vivian agreed. At your age, Cordelia, a big house is a real burden. Topia and Castor could make a real family home there. Mom doesn't want to give up the house, Taffia said sharply. She thinks we should buy our own place, not give the house to her own daughter. Vivian feigned extreme surprise. Buffets, it's natural for parents to help their children start a family. I've always helped Topia, I replied calmly. I paid for her education and supported all her endeavors, but a house is more than just property. It's my life, my memorious me. Business. Vivian snorted. You call breeding cats a business? Yes. It looked her straight in the eye. The kid brings in a steady income and has a reputation far beyond Kansas. With all due respect, Richard interjected with a patronizing smile, selling a few kittens a year is hardly a real business. Each kitten from my catering costs between $3 and $5. Oh, I said, feeling my patience wearing thin. I sell about 30 animals a year, plus breeding services and consultations for a woman my age. That's a more than decent income. Nevertheless, Vivian paused to take a sip of champagne. At your age, be thinking about the future, about how to secure your old age, not cling to the past. I felt anger boiling up inside me. These people, whom I had met for the first time, were allowing themselves to discuss my life, my decisions, my home, as if I were an incompetent old woman in need of their wise guidance. I appreciate your concern, said, trying to remain calm, but I assure you that I am perfectly capable of planning my own future, and my house plays a central role in those plans. You know, Richard leaned forward with the look of a man ready to make a generous offer. Vivian and I have discussed this, and if it's a matter of finances, we're willing to help. We could help with the purchase of that apartment Tafia mentioned as a token of our respect, and as a wedding gift to the young couple. I couldn't believe my ears. They were offering me money to vacate the house for their son as if I were a tenant who needed to be evicted. That's very generous of you, I said, struggling to contain my indignation. But it's not about the money. I'm not selling my house, period. You won't sell it or give it to your daughter. Vivian raised her perfectly plucked eyebrow. Neither. I straightened up, and if you don't mindied, prefer to change the subject. We're here to get to know each other and celebrate the upcoming wedding, not discuss my property. Of course, Vivian pretended to back down, though her eyes remained cold. Let's talk about something more pleasant, for example, wedding gifts. Richard and I have decided to give the newlyweds a car, the latest BMW model. What are you planning to give them? Cordelia, it was a low blow, and Will knew it. I opened my mouth to respond, but Sophia suddenly interrupted. I think it's time to order our main courses. She practically waved the waiter over. I'm starving. The rest of the dinner was spent in strained attempts to maintain small talk. Vivian talked about her travels, Richard talked about golf, Castor and Sophia discussed the latest wedding preparations. I mostly kept quiet, inserting short comments where necessary. Inside, I felt a growing sense that something was wrong. Were these people my daughter's future family, these cold, calculating snobs who considered my life worthless and my property fair game for their son? When dinner was finally over, I felt almost physical relief. The farewell was strained and polite, with promises to see each other at the wedding and continue our delightful acquaintance. I'll drive you home, Sophia said quietly as Lena and Castor headed for the parking lot. We drove in silence for a while. Then Sophia sighed. They're not as bad as they seem, she said, not looking at me. They're just old school. They're used to being in control. They talked about Melik. I was a crazy old woman, I replied, and they discussed my house as if it were already theirs. They just want to help Castor and me start a family, Sophia said defensively. Is that so wrong? A2O's expense, Sophia. At the expense of my house, my business, my life, you allays, everything. She slammed on the brakes at a traffic light. This is about family, about helping your only daughter help or give away everything I have. No writhing, just the house that will be mine by inheritance anyway. So you've just decided to speed up the process. My voice grew colder. Kick me out while I'm still alive. You're unbearably. Sophia slammed her hands on the steering wheel. I'm trying to work this out amicably, but you refuse to even consider a compromise. What compromise, Sophia? You want my house. I don't want to give it to you. Where is there room for compromise? The car stopped in front of my house. Sophia turned to me, and in the light of the street lamp I saw that her eyes were shining with tears. You know what, Mom? I've tried to be patient. I tried to explain why it's important, but you refused to listen. I'm listening, Sophia. I just can't agree. Then I have an ultimatum. Her voice hardened. Either I assign the deed to the house by my wedding day, or I don't want to see you at the ceremony. I felt something cold and heavy sink into my chest. You can't be serious, I whispered. You're forbidding your mother from attending your wedding because of the house. I'm perfectly serious, Sophia said, staring straight ahead. Make up your mind. You have until Friday. I got out of the car without saying a word. Sophia drove away without waiting for me to reach the door, which was completely out of character for her. When I entered the house, I didn't turn on the lights. I just stood in the dark hallway, feeling the cats rub against my legs, greeting their mistress. Something inside me felt numb. My own daughter had given me a choice, my home or the chance to see her wedding. The next morning I called Ella Laner, my oldest friend from college who hadn't spoken in months. She had been traveling a lot since her husband died, but I knew that if anyone could give moin best advice, it was her. Cordelia, her voice sounded warm and familiar on the other end of the line. What a lovely surprise. How are you? How are the Cathy? I'm confused, Ellie, I said, skipping the usual pleasantries. I need your advice. It told her the whole story about Sophia's sudden demand to give up the house, Castor's financial problems, the unpleasant meeting with his parents, and finally the ultimatum. There was a pause. Are you there?
Yes.
Her voice changed, becoming more cautious. I'm just thinking about the situation. And what do you think? Am I going crazy for not wanting to give up house? Cordelia, she said slowly, as if choosing her words carefully. I understand your attachment to the house. I really do, but maybe you're too attached to material things. What? I couldn't believe my ears. You think I should just give the house away? Think about the bigger picture. Her tone becoming most condescending. Sophia is your only daughter. Her wedding is the most important event in her life, and the house, it's just walls and a roof. At your age, it might be smarter to live in something more compact. Ellie, this house is my whole life. This is where my bemis is my memories of Saul. Your memories will stay with you wherever you live, she interrupted. And as for your business, well, to be honest, at 65, it's time to retire. Retire from what? From what brings me joy and income. Cordelia sighed. I think you're being a little selfish. Parents are supposed to help their children. It's the natural order of things. I've helped Tafia her whole life, I exclaimed, but giving away the house isn't helping, it's giving up your own life. I can see you're not ready for a rational discussion. Her voice grew colder. Call me when you've calmed down and think carefully what's more important, bricks and mortar, or your relationship with your only daughter. The conversation ended. On an unpleasant note, I sat staring at the silent fiend and felt betrayed. Ella Lanner, who had known me for 30 years, had suddenly started speaking the language of Tafion. Castor selfish, was it selfish to defend my right to my own life? The wedding dragged on agonizingly slowly. Topia didn't call, waiting for my decision. I was silent too, not knowing what to say inside me. There was a struggle between maternal love and self-preservation. Maybe I really was too stubborn. Maybe I should give in, but every time I started to lean toward compromise, something stopped me. The image of Castor coldly assessing my home, the condescending tone of his parents, and, most importantly, how Tafia had changed around him, turning from an independent, strong woman into someone who was willing to blackmail her own mother for the sake of a house. No, there was something sinister behind all this, and I couldn't just turn a blind eye to it. On Thursday, the day before Tafia's ultimatum expired, and 2 days before the wedding, I made a decision. I would go to the wedding, but I wouldn't sign any papers if Topia carried out her threatened, refused to let me attend. That would be her choice, one that I hoped she would someday. Regret, I dialed her number, but the phone was off, leaving a short message. I'm coming to the wedding, I love you. I put down the phone and went to check on the kittens. Deep down I hoped that Tafia would change her mind, that she wouldn't kick her mother out of her wedding, but another more realistic part of me was preparing for the worst day. I sat on the porch for a long time, looking up at the stars and remembering how Saul and I had once dreamed of the future. Could he have imagined that our daughter would turn into someone who valued possessions more than family ties, that his home, which he loved so much, would become the subject of such an ugly conflict? Blackwood jumped onto my lap and I automatically began to stroke his thick fur. What would you do, buddy? I asked the cat. Would you give up your kingdom for the sake of imaginary peace? The cat blinked as if to say never. And at that moment I knew I had made the right decision. To give in to blackmail would mean losing not only my home but also my self-respect, and without it, what kind of life could be happy? The day was surprisingly clear and warm for the end of September. The sky above which stretched out like a blue canvas without a single cloud, as if nature itself was blessing this day. I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing out the folds of the lavender dress I had bought specially for the wedding. Classic cut, elegant mid-calf length, no frills. I wanted to look dignified but not draw too much attention to myself. After our last conversation, Tofia never called back. All I got from her was a short message. The ceremony starts at 11. Don't plate, no mention of the ultimatum, no warmth. Just a dry reminder, as if a secretary was contacting an insignificant guest. Well, at least, she's not forbidding me to attend, I said, tummy reflection, as I fastened my pearl earrings, a wedding gift from Saul. Blackwood watched me get ready, with regal dignity from his spot on the bed. Don't worry, I said, stroking him between the ears. Your food is ready, and there's plenty of water. I'll be back in the evening. The wedding was at Willow Creek, a country club 20 minutes outside of town. The place was famous for its well-kept gardens and magnificent view of a small lake. When I arrived, I found the parking lot already filled with guests and white signs decorated with ribbons and flowers that read Tafia and Castor's wedding. Despite the early hot heat was already making itself felt, I slowly walked along the white gravel path to the main club building, feeling my heart beat quicken. Strangers bustled around me, guests, waiters, photographers. I recognized a few old family friends who nodded at me but didn't come over, as if sensing the tension. The ceremony washed in the garden, where rows of white chairs were lined up in front of a small arch decorated with fresh flowers. I took a seat in the third row alone. The groom's parents were seated in the front row, and I noticed Vivon turn and give me cold look before turning away and whispering something to her husband. Soft music began to play. Castor, dressed in an impeccable dark suit, took his place under the arch. His face expressed confidence and anticipation. He didn't look in my direction once, even though he must have seen me enter when Tafia, hired in a white dress with an elegant lace top. A murmur of admiration ran through the rows of guests. She was beautiful, tall, slender, with her head held high. She was led to the altar by Castor's brother, who was standing in for the bride's absent father. My heart ached at the sight. Saul should have been there, leading his daughter into a new life as she passed. My Rotopia's gaze met mine for a moment. Something flashed in her eyes. not anger but rather a complex mixture of emotions that I couldn't do. Then she looked forward again to where Castor was waiting. The ceremony was beautiful and traditional, the exchange of vows, rings, and a tender kiss to the applause of the guests. I watched it all, as if through glass, feeling strangely detached. My daughter was getting married, and I was sitting there like a stranger, not sharing in her happiness, not being part of this important day. After the ceremony, the guests were invited to the club's banquet hall for a reception. Long tables decorated with tablecloths and flower arrangements formed the letter P. In the center was a table for the newlyweds and their parents. To my surprise, I was seated quite far from the main table next to some of Castor's relatives I didn't know very well. It was a deliberate humiliation, but I decided not to show that I was hurt. I exchanged phrases with my table neighbors, smiled when propriety demanded it, but inside, I felt a growing tension. The toast began. The bride and groom's friends rose one by one, telling funny stories and wishing them happiness and prosperity. Castor's parents gave a stilted speech about continuing family traditions and the importance of a strong family. No one asked me to say a few words. Another small jab. When they was served for the main toast, Castor rose with a glass in his hand. The room fell silent. Dear friends and family, began in his soulful voice, today is a special day, not only for me and Tafia but for all of our loved ones. It is a day when two families are united and a new story begins. He spoke eloquently with the special confidence that had always distinguished him. The guests listened attentively, sometimes nodding or smiling in response to his words. I want to thank my parents, Castor continued, for their support and wisdom. You always believed in me, even when I doubted myself, and I am infinitely grateful for that. Vivian and Richard nodded graciously, accepting the praise due, and of course, Castor turned toward me and I felt my insides tense. I want to express my special gratitude to Topia's mother Cordelia for her generosity and kindness. A murmur of approval ran through the room. Several guests turned to me with smiles. Cordelia. Castor raised his glass in my direction. Your wedding gift to us is more than just a gesture. By giving Usair family home, the house where Topia grew up, you are giving us not just a roof over our heads, but the opportunity to continue family traditions and create a real home for our future. Family thrilled seemed to freeze. I felt the color rush to my cheeks, and my heart begin to beat wildly. Dozens of eyes were fixed on them, surprised, approving, admiring. They didn't know that it was all a lie, that I had never agreed to give up my home, that Castor had publicly put me in a position where I had to either smile and accept gratitude for something I hadn't done, or cause a scandal by refuting his words. It is a great honor for us, Castor continued, seemingly oblivious to my state, to be able to preserve and enhance what you have created over many years. Your nursery will find new life and your traditions will be continued. Topia sat next to him, staring straight ahead. Her face was tense and her fingers clenched the glass so tightly that it seemed as if the thin glass was about to crack. To Cordelia. Castor raised his glass even higher. To her generosity and motherly love. To Cordelia, echoed the guests, raising their glasses. I sat there, frozen inside me, a storm of emotions. Rage, anger, humiliation, distrust. How could they, how dare they use this day, this moment to corner me, to force me to either lie and support their deception or make a scene at my own daughter's wedding. As if in a fog, I noticed Topia getting up from her seat and heading toward me. She was holding a folder with documents in her hands. It was the same folder I had refused to sign earlier. The guests watched with interest, not understanding the true meaning of this scene. Mom. Topia stopped next to me, her voice quiet but steely. Did you forget to sign the documents? Don't worry, I brought copies. Let's do it now so everyone can share this moment with us. She placed the folder on the table in front of me and handed me a pen. Her eyes were cold and determined. Tafia, I said so quietly that only she could hear. You know I'd agreed to give up the house. Why are you doing this now, in front of everyone? Because you left me no choice, she replied, her expression unchanged. Sign the papers, Mom. Everyone already knows about your generous gift. Don't make a scene at my wedding, Mrs. Atlee. Castor's voice rang out as he approached and stood beside his wife. Perhaps you need some help. Legal language can be complicated. I can explain exactly what you're signing. He spoke loudly enough for the nearest guest to hear him. His condescending tone and patronizing smile were designed to make me look like a confused old woman who didn't understand what was going on. I looked at him, then at Tafia, and suddenly felt a strange calmness. They had cornered me, thinking I wouldn't dare stand up to them in public, that maternal love and fear of judgment would make me obey. But there are things more important than fear of scandal. There are principles that cannot be compromised, even for the sake of loved ones. Slowly, with dignity, I rose from my seat. Guests whispered nearby, not understanding the reason for the delay. Topia and Castor stood opposite me, their faces expressing impatience and hidden triumph. I would like to say a few words, I said loudly enough to attract the attention of the entire all. The conversations died down, and all eyes turned to me. Mom, Topia hissed. Don't just sign it. I ignored her and continued. I must clarify the situation. Contrary to what has just been said, I did not give my house to the newlyweds. I never agreed to transfer my property. A surprised whisper ran through the hall. Castor took a step forward, his face contorted with poorly concealed anger. Cordelia, you must have forgotten our conversation. His voice remained soft, but his eyes flashed with anger. We discussed everything a few weeks ago. You agreed to give the house to Sophia as a wedding gift. That's a lie, I said calmly but firmly. I have repeatedly refused such a generous gesture. And you both know that very well. What is happening now is an attempt to publicly force me to do something I do not agree with. Topia's face palled with rage or shame. I couldn't tell. She grabbed my arm and tried to pull me away. Mom, you're ruining everything. Stop it. Her voice trembled with tension, but I gently freed my hand and turned to the guests. I think you all deserve to know the truth. For the past few months, Topia and Castor have been pressuring me to give them my house and my kennel. When I refused, threats and manipulation followed, including an ultimatum not to come to the wedding if I didn't sign the papers. The guests began to whisper among themselves, some looking clearly shocked. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Vivian and Ricard exchanged worried glances. Why are you so insistent? I continued, feeling my determination to speak my mind grow. This isn't about family traditions or building a nest, it's about money. Castor is facing serious financial problems. I've learned that he's having difficulties at work because of a bad land deal. That's slander, Castor exclaimed, his face contorted with anger. Won't let you spread lies about my business. Slander? I raised an eyebrow and explained why during our conversation at the restaurant. You mentioned that you wanted to move to Denver after get house. Why did you talk about selling my kennel as if it were a done deal? I love my daughter. My voice softened. I have always supported her and wanted her to be happy, but I can't stay silent when I see her being used, and I can't give away the house that was built with the love and hard work of my late husband and me to someone who plans to sell it immediately without considering its true value. Topia, who had been standing there as if paralyzed, suddenly stepped forward. Her face was contorted with rage and her voice trembled with barely contained emotion enough. She shouted, Stop shaming me on my wedding day. You've always been like this, cold, selfish. It's always been your cats, your house, your rules that mattered more than me. Topia. I tried to gently touch her hand, but she recoiled as if from a flame. Don't touch me. Her voice broke into a scream. You started this. You just had to sign the papers. It's just a house. But no, it was more important for you to prove you were right, to humiliate me in front of everyone. The hall was deathly silent. The guests stared at us with wide eyes, not knowing how to react to this unexpected turn of events in the middle of a wedding celebration. I never wanted to humiliate you, I said quietly. I wanted to protect you and myself. Protect? Topia laughed bitterly. From what? From a happy marriage? From your own home? From a man who uses you to solve his financial problems? I said, looking at Castor, who was now standing a little apart, clearly wondering how to get out of the situation with the least damage. Topia followed my gaze, and for a moment doubt flashed in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a new wave of anger. Get out, she said quietly but clearly. Get out of my wedding. You are no longer my daughter. Those words hit me like a physical blow. I felt something break inside me, the bond that had existed between us since the moment I first held her in my arms as a newborn. But even through the pain, I felt a strange calm. I had done what I had to do. I had told the truth. If that's your decision, I'll accept it, I said, looking my daughter straight in the eyes. But know this, I will always love you and my door will be open to you, only to you. That last hint did not escape the guests' attention. Some of them now looked at Castor with obvious distrust. I slowly gathered my purse and shawl, left my untouched glass of champagne on the table, and headed for the exit. The room parted before me like the Red Sea. No one dared to speak, though I could see a range of emotions on their faces, from condemnation to sympathy. As I left, I heard chaos erupt behind me. Semyon began loudly demanding explanations from Castor. Someone's glass shattered on the floor and Vivian was shouting something about a misunderstanding, but the loudest voice in the commotion was Topia's, shouting that the wedding was still on. that everything was fine, that her mother had simply lost her mind, but I didn't turn around. A clear blue sky greeted me as I stepped out of the stuffy hall into the fresh air. Each step along the gravel path took me further away from the scandal I had unwittingly provoked and closer to the house for which I had just paid such a high price, home to the only creatures who accepted me for who I was, me beautiful, proud, independent cats. December in Wicha was snowy. A thin white blanket covered my garden, making it look like a whimsical fairy tale setting. From the kitchen window, I watched the last fallen leaves swirl in the wind before falling onto the snow and becoming part of the winter landscape. 3 months had passed since that fateful day when my life was divided into before and after. 3 months with a single word from Tapia. In the first weeks after the wedding scandal, I waited for a call or message from my daughter. Every time the phone rang, my heart skipped a beat, but it was clients inquiring about kittens or Henry, my lawyer, checking in on me. Not a word from Topia. Information about what happened after I left the wedding reached me in bits and pieces through mutual acquaintance. Eleanor, my old friend, who had so unexpectedly taken Topia's side, called a week after the scandal, her voice sounding embarrassed and guilty. Cordelia, I don't know what to say. I was wrong, she began without preamble. What happened at the wedding? Everyone was in shock. What exactly happened? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. After he left, it was complete chaos. Eleanor sighed. Some of the guests started asking Castor questions about his financial situation, and someone even brought up the story about his failed land project. Castor's parents tried to smooth things over, but it was too late. Many guests simply left, citing urgent business. The ceremony was effectively ruined, and Tafia. My voice trembled despite my best efforts. She was devastated. Eleanor paused. At first, she tried to pretend that everything was fine, that the wedding was going ahead, but when almost half the guests had left, she broke down. She shouted at everyone, including Castor. It was hard to watch. Later, I learned from other guests that Tafia and Castor had exchanged vows that day. After all, despite the scandal, the wedding took place, though not as they had planned. The honeymoon in Europe apparently did. To a friend who works at a travel agency, confirmed that they flew to Italy as planned. But something told me that the trip was unlikely to have been cloudless. During the first month, I tried to call Topia several times. Both the phone was either turned off, or she simply did not answer my calls. I left messages, each time shorter and more formal, as talking to a void began to seem pointless. By the end of the second month, I decided to take a more serious step. After much deliberation and consultation with Henry, I prepared documents for a partial gift, not of my home, but of a significant amount of money that could help Tafia with the down payment on her own place. It was a compromise I could make with a clear conscience. I sent Tafia a letter by regular mail, knowing that she would most likely ignore an email. In the letter, I briefly explained my offer and expressed me hope for reconciliation, no apologies. I didn't think I owed her an apology for protecting my home and myself, but a hand extended across the chasm that had formed between us. A week later, on Saturday morning, as I was finishing cleaning the kitten's room, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting any guests or clients, so the ring caught me off guard. When I approached the door, I saw a familiar silhouette through the glass panel. My heart leaped. Tafia. I opened the door, trying not to show my excitement. My daughter stood on the threshold, wrapped in a dark blue coat. Her face was gaunt with dark circles under her eyes, and her usually perfectly styled hair was carelessly pulled back into a ponytail. She looked both older and more vulnerable than I remembered her on her wedding day. I said softly, "Come in, please, it's cold outside." She crossed the threshold with obvious reluctance, as if she were entering a strange, potentially dangerous house, not the place where she had spent her entire childhood. "I got your letter," she said without preamble, her voice cold. I decided to respond in person. "Come into the living room," I offered. I was just about to make some tea. "No thank you," Tafia said curtly. "I won't be long." We went into the living room anyway, where Blackwood, my old pedigree cat, was dozing in his favorite chair. When entered, he opened his eyes, assessed the situation, and seemed to decide to ignore the unexpected guest, sinking back into his slumber. Topia remained standing, even though I gestured for her to sit down. She took the familiar envelope, my letter, and another folder out of her bag. "Your offer, Shabagan, is an insult after everything that's happened. You think you can buy me off with some pathetic money." "Topia, it's not a bribe," I tried to say calmly. "It's an attempt to help. I know how important it is for you to have your own place, and I am willing to support you in that, but not at the expense of my home." Your home, her voice rose an octave. You've always thought only of yourself, your home, your cats, your comfort. What about my life, which you destroyed? I destroyed your life. I couldn't hide my surprise by not letting Castor use us both. Castor loved me, Topia exclaimed, but there was uncertainty in her voice. He cared about our future. Cared about your future, or about solving his financial problems? I asked gently without accusation. Don't you dare. Tafia clenched her fists. Don't you dare disparage him. Don't you dare pretend you know what was between us. I decided not to press the issue. Mimother's heart sensed that Topia's anger masked deep pain, and I didn't want to add to her suffering. I'm not trying to disparage anyone, I said quietly. I just want you to be happy, Tafia, and if you need my help to achieve that, I'm willing to give it within reason. Within reasons. Laughed bitterly. Do you know what happened after that wedding? We were condemned, all our acquaintances, friends, colleagues. Everyone looked at us like we were frauds. Thanks to you, in your public speech, I only told the truth. Topia, it took a step toward her, but she backed away. I couldn't let Castor lie to everyone about my supposed generous gift. You could have just played along, she exclaimed, for me, for my happiness, and then we could have discussed everything in private play. Along with the deception, I shook my head. That wouldn't have solved the problem. It would have only delayed the inevitable. Besides, I couldn't let you tie your life to a man who had already started it with a lie. Topia shook her head violently as if trying to shake off my words. You don't understand. Her voice trembled. You think you protected me, but you ruined everything. Do you know what Castor did when he came back from Italy? He packed his things and left. He said he couldn't put the woman whose mother threatened his reputation and his business. That's what happened. Castor dumped her as soon as he realized the house plan had failed. It was exactly what I had feared, but hearing it by my daughter's own mouth was painful. Topia, I'm sorry you're suffering, I said sincerely, but if Castor really loved you, he wouldn't have left because he didn't get my house. He left because of the scandal, because of shame, because of what you did at our wedding. She raised her voice, but Blackwood, unlike his usual self, continued to doze, only occasionally opening his eyes to check the situation. No, Tafia. I shook my head. He left because his plan didn't work. If he truly loved you, no scandal would have made him leave. You don't know, Topia shouted. You never understood me. You always thought you knew better. And now that my life is ruined, you offer me a handout. She grabbed the folder with the documents and waved it in front of my face. Do you think this money will fix anything? It's not charity, Topia, I said, my voice remaining calm, though inside I was writhing in pain. It's a sincere desire to help. If you don't want to take it, I'll understand. You can't even admit your guilt now. She threw the folder in my face. The documents scattered across the floor, some landing near Blackwood's chair, but he only followed them with a lazy glance. You ruined my life, and now you're trying to buy forgiveness. Tafia, I'm sorry for your, but I don't regret telling you the truth. I began to gather the scattered papers. You can be angry with me now, Andy, understand that, but someday I hope you'll see that I did it out of love. For you, love. She laughed, but her laughter was full of bitterness. Love doesn't ruin other people's lives. Love doesn't put a house above the well-being of your own daughter. Tafia, I straightened up, looking her straight in the eye. The house has nothing to do with it. It's about the truth and self-respect. It's about not letting others manipulate you or your loved ones. You know what? Topia took a step back, as if preparing to leave. I no longer consider you my mother. You ditto me on that day at the wedding. Those words hit me harder than any physical pain I felt. Something broke inside Methbond that had existed between us since the moment I first held her as a newborn. If that's your decision, I'll accept it, I said quietly, but know this, I will always love you, and my door will always be open to you. I don't need your love or your open door, Topia said, heading for the exit. Goodbye, Cordelia. She left, slamming the door loudly behind her. I stood there in the middle of the living room, surrounded by scattered documents, with a feeling of emptiness that seemed like it would never go away. Blackwood finally got up from his seat, stretched, and walked over to me, gentle and nudging my hand with his head as if to say, don't worry, I'm still here. The next few months passed in a blur. I threw myself into my work at the cattery, as if caring for the cats could fill the void in my heart. I heard nothing from Taifielthau. I occasionally found out about her through mutual acquaintances. It turned out that Castor hadn't just left there. He had been arrested for fraud. His financial problems were much more serious than I had imagined. And the house he had so insistently demanded from me was probably his last hope of paying off his creditors before everything came to light. Several times I was tempted to call my daughter to offer her support during this difficult time, but something stopped me. Topia's last words, "You're dead to me," still echoed in my head. Maybe it was better to give her time. If she wanted to repair our relationship, she knew where to find me. Spring came early to Witcha. By early March, the snow had almost completely melted and the first crocuses were beginning to sprout in my garden. One of those days I was sitting on the porch in a wicker chair enjoying the unexpectedly warm sun. Next to me was a small wicker basket with 3 newborn kittens of a rare lilac color, a real treasure for my cattery Blackwood, who had become even more attached to me in recent months, lay at my feet occasionally raising his head to check on his offspring. These kittens were his last children at his age. I decided it was time to send him into well-deserved retirement. Looking at the tiny faces of the kittens, I couldn't help thinking about how strange life is. Just a few months ago, I wondered whether me principles were worth breaking off relations with. My only daughter. More than once I woke up in the middle of the night, tormented by doubts about whether I had done the right thing by not compromising for the sake of peace in the family. But sitting here now, surrounded by my pets in a house full of memories, I realized that I couldn't have done anything differently. You can't build happiness on a foundation of lies and manipulation. You can't maintain self-rest by giving in to blackmail, even from your own family, and you can't truly help those you love by indulging their mistakes. The price I paid was enormous. The loss of my daughter is a wound that may never fully heal, but I couldn't imagine myself living in a small apartment, giving up my career, watching the house that Saul and I had built with so much love being sold to pay off someone else's debts. The quiet sound of gravel under the tires brought me out of my reverie. An unfamiliar car was pulling up to the house. Blackwood instantly raised his head, his ears turning toward the sound. A woman got out of the car. Even from a distance I recognized her. Topia. She looked different, lost, thinner, her face pale. She stood by the car for a few seconds as if gathering her courage, then slowly headed toward the house. At that moment, transformed, the calm, phlegmatic cat who usually greeted all guests with regal indifference suddenly turned into something terrifying. He jumped up, the hair on his neck stood on end, his tail puffed up to an incredible size, and a low guttural growl escaped from his throat that sent shivers down my spine. Blackwood, what's wrong? I tried to calm him down, but he paid no attention to me. His eyes fixed on Topia. As she approached, Topia climbed the steps of the porch and stopped a few feet away from us, her gaze shifting fearfully. Toth hissing, cat mom, she said quietly, I need to talk to you. Blackwood took a few steps forward, his body tense as a spring, his pupils dilated, turning high size into black abysses, rimmed with a thin strip of amber. He let out another threatening sound, something between a hiss and a growl that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I had never seen him like this before. It was as if my pet had turned into a wild predator ready to attack. What's wrong with him? Topia took a step back, clearly frightened. He's always been so calm. This is the first time I've seen him like this, I admitted, just as surprised as my daughter. I tried to go around Blackwood to get to Topia, but the cat immediately shifted position. Stay between us, Blackwood. It's okay, it's Topia. But the cat continued to hit, tail darting from side to side, a sure sign of extreme agitation in cats. When Topia made another attempt to approach, he arched his back and let out such a fierce sound that she recoiled. Mom, I wanted to tell you, she tried to say, keeping her eyes on the cat. Castor has been arrested. You were right about him. He used me to get to your house. Blackwood continued to stand between us, not allowing Topia to come any closer. His behavior was so unusual that I began to wonder if he could sense something beyond human perception. Topia, I know about Castor, I said, Maquino. Attempt to get around the cat, knowing that would only increase his agitation. I'm sorry you had to go through this. I need your help, Mom, she said, her voice filled with despair. I have nothing left. Castor took everything. I thought maybe I could stay here until I got back on my feet. Blackwood, as if understanding every word, let out another threatening growl and took another step toward Tafia, forcing her to retreat closer to the steps. I can't even come near you because that beast, she laughed nervously. It seems even your cat doesn't want me. Hire watched the scene with growing understanding. Blackwood, my faithful companion of recent years, the one who had always been there when I cried at night over the loss of my daughter, the one who seemed to understand my feelings better than anyone else, was now protecting me, not from physical threat, but from the emotional pain that Tofia's return to my life could bring. Tafia, I said slowly, making no attempt to calm the cat. The last time we saw each other, you said I was dead to you. You threw the documents I had prepared to help you in my face. You rejected my love and support, and now you're coming back just because you have nowhere else to go. Her face contorted with a mixture of shame and anger. I thought you'd be happy I came back, that you wanted to rebuild a relationship. I do, Sophia, with all my heart, I said, speaking the truth, but not like this, not when you come to me only because you need a place to stay. Our relationship should be based on mutual and love, not necessity. Blackwood, as if approving my words, relaxed slightly, though he remained on guard. So you won't let me in? Topia's voice sounded incredulous. After all you said about your door always being open, my doors are always open to you, Topia. I confirmed, but not on the terms you're offering. Not when you're only coming back because you have nowhere else to go. I can help you find a place to live. I can support you financially. The documents you rejected are still valid, but I won't let myself be used, not even be my own daughter. Topia stood there thinking about my words. Her face reflected a struggle of emotions: anger, shame, despair. So you're just like him, she finally said. It all comes down to conditions, to cold calculation. No, Sophia, I shook my head. It comes down to self-respect, to not allowing others to use you, even those you love most in the world. She looked at me for a long moment, then shifted her gaze to Blackwood. Hoa still standing between us, ready to move from threats to action at any moment. Goodbye, Mom, she finally said, but this time there was no anger in her voice, only exhaustion, and perhaps a glimmer of understanding. Maybe I'll come back someday. When I'm ready, I'll wait, I said sincerely, but don't come back for the house or the money. Come back for us. She nodded, turned, and walked slowly to her car. Only when she disappeared around the corner did Blackwood finally relax. The hair on his mane settled. His tail returned to its normal state, and he walked over to me, gently nudging my hand with his head as if to say, "It's okay, everything's fine." She nodded, turned around, and slowly walked to her car. Only when she disappeared around the corner did Blackwood finally relax. The hair on his mane settled, his tail returned to its normal state, and he walked over to me, gently nudging my hand with his head as if to say, "Everything's okay, everything's fine." I knelt down beside him, hugging his neck, feeling tears swelling up in my eyes. Not only because of the new goodbye to my daughter, but also because of the amazing loyalty of this creature that many considered to be just a dumb animal. "Thank you, my friend," I whispered, stroking his head. "You saw what I might not have noticed." My quiet morning was interrupted by a friendly squeak from the basket. The kittens had woken up and were unambiguously letting everyone know that it was time for dinner. Even if their owner was experiencing heartache, they wriggled, crawling over each other, their tiny mouths opening and demanding meows so thin and piercing that it was impossible to ignore them. Blackwood, instantly switching from protector to caring father, looked at me expressively. His amber eyes seemed to say, "Mother, what are we waiting for? Let's feed the little ones." He stretched and moved decisively toward the door, glancing back periodically to make sure I was following. Life went on with all its earthly needs and small joys, and in this ordinariness there was a healing power of its